This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
A decade had passed since the events of Little Men unfolded. In that time, Joe Baer's Plumfield School for Boys had blossomed into a thriving institution, nurturing young minds and hearts alike. The late afternoon sun bathed Plumfield's sprawling grounds in a warm golden light. Laughter echoed across the lawn, carried on a gentle breeze that rustled through the leaves of ancient oak trees. Joe's sons, Rob and Teddy, darted between the gnarled trunks, their bare feet kicking up tufts of grass as they chased each other with unbridled joy. Nearby, their adopted sister Josie sat cross-legged on a checkered blanket, her nose buried in a leather-bound book. Every so often, she'd peek over the pages, a small smile playing on her lips as she watched her brother's antics. Joe stood on the porch, her hands shielding her eyes from the sun's glare. The familiar rumble of wheels on gravel sent a thrill of anticipation through her. Her heart quickened as a carriage came into view, kicking up dust in its wake. It was like watching a flock of birds returning home after a long winter, a homecoming she'd been eagerly awaiting. Tommy Bangs was the first to leap down, his feet barely touching the ground before he was bounding towards Joe. His mischievous grin had matured into a confident smile, but his eyes still sparkled with the same boyish charm that had both exasperated and endeared him to everyone at Plumfield. Close on his heels came Nat Blake, no longer the timid boy who'd arrived years ago with nothing but a battered violin and a heart full of hope. He carried himself with quiet assurance now, his violin case slung over one shoulder like a badge of honor. The thunder of hooves announced Dan Keen's arrival. He swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, his wild spirit barely contained beneath a veneer of adulthood. Emil Hoffman, Joe's sailor nephew, practically bounced with excitement as he joined the group, the salt of distant seas still clinging to his sun-weathered clothes. Last but not least, Demi Brooks stepped out, his thoughtful demeanor a stark contrast to the exuberance around him. Yet even he couldn't suppress a wide smile as he took in the familiar sights and sounds of Plumfield. "My boys!" Joe cried, her voice thick with emotion as she rushed forward with open arms. She was enveloped in a whirlwind of hugs, the years melting away in an instant. The scent of soap and sunshine mingled with hints of tobacco and sea air, a heady mixture that spoke of the men they'd become. Professor Baer stood nearby, his eyes twinkling with pride as he watched the reunion unfold. As they made their way inside, the halls of Plumfield seemed to come alive with memories. Every corner held a story, every room echoed with the ghosts of childhood laughter. They gathered in the cozy sitting room, settling into familiar chairs as if they'd never left. The fading sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. "Tell us everything," Joe urged, leaning forward eagerly, her hands clasped in her lap. "What adventures have you been having?" Tommy, always ready with a tale, launched into a colorful description of his latest business venture. His words painted pictures of bustling markets and daring negotiations, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke. Joe couldn't help but marvel at how the boy who once struggled to sit still now commanded attention with such ease. Nat's turn came next, his voice soft but steady as he shared his plans to study music in Europe. "I never thought I'd have the courage," he admitted, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "But Plumfield taught me to believe in myself." His fingers absently traced the outline of his violin case, as if drawing strength from the instrument that had been his constant companion. Dan's story was like the man himself, rough around the edges, but with a core of pure gold. He spoke of his work with a mining company, of the challenges and triumphs he'd faced. "I've seen some dark places," he said, his eyes meeting Joe's, "but I always remembered what you taught us about finding the light." The calluses on his hands spoke of hard work, but the gentleness in his voice revealed the heart that Joe had always known was there. Emil's excitement was contagious as he described his upcoming voyage. His words carried the scent of salt air and adventure, making everyone lean in closer. "I'm going to be a captain someday," he declared, his chin lifted in determination. "Just you wait and see." The others exchanged knowing glances. If anyone could tame the wild seas, it was Emil. When Demi spoke of his ambition to work for a newspaper, his quiet passion filled the room. "There are so many stories out there," he mused. "I want to tell them all." Joe could almost see the words dancing in his eyes, waiting to be set free on paper. As the afternoon wore on, laughter mingled with tears of joy. Stories flowed like a river, carrying them all back to the golden days of their youth. The bonds forged in childhood had only grown stronger with time, weathering the storms of adulthood. Outside, the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Joe stood by the window, watching as her little men gathered on the lawn, their silhouettes etched against the fading light. Her heart swelled with pride and a bittersweet ache. "They've grown so much," she murmured to herself, "and yet, in so many ways, they're still my boys." As the day wound down, Joe reflected on how her little men had grown and the bright futures that lay ahead of them. In their faces, she saw not just the boys they had been, but the remarkable men they had become. And in that moment, she knew that Plumfield's legacy would live on through each and every one of them. The warm glow of contentment settled over Joe as she bid goodnight to her boys, each hug a reminder of the love that had shaped their lives. As she climbed the stairs to her own room, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A sliver of light spilled from beneath a closed door. Nan's room. Joe paused, her hand hovering over the doorknob. What could be keeping Nan up so late? With a mixture of curiosity and concern, Joe gently pushed the door open, unprepared for the sight that awaited her. The soft glow of an oil lamp cast long shadows across Nan's small study, illuminating piles of medical textbooks scattered about like a paper fortress. Her fingers, stained with ink, traced the intricate diagrams of human anatomy as she furrowed her brow in concentration. The tick-tock of the clock on the wall seemed to echo her racing thoughts, each second a reminder of the long road ahead. Outside, the world moved on, but Nan remained fixed in her pursuit, a lighthouse of determination amidst a sea of doubt. The scent of old books and fresh ink permeated the air, a comforting aroma that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. At lectures, Nan often found herself the only woman in a sea of men, their curious glances a constant reminder of her outsider status. The rustle of papers and the low murmur of male voices surrounded her like a wall, but she held her head high, her notebook clutched to her chest like a shield against their skepticism. The local clinic became Nan's sanctuary, a place where her presence was a mix of novelty and necessity. The antiseptic smell and the hushed whispers of patients created a backdrop for her growing expertise. She assisted where she could, her gentle hands and keen mind earning grudging respect from some of the older doctors. Each day brought new challenges, but also new affirmations of her chosen path. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves danced on the breeze outside her window, a knock at the door interrupted Nan's studies. The sound echoed in the quiet room, startling her from her concentration. She opened it to find Tommy Bangs, her childhood friend, standing there with a bouquet of wildflowers and a hopeful smile. "Nan," Tommy said, his voice warm with affection, "I was hoping you might join me for dinner this evening." Nan's heart gave a little twist, a familiar ache of longing mixed with resolve. Tommy, now a successful businessman, had grown into a handsome and kind man. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life with him, comfortable, secure, and socially acceptable. The image was as tempting as a warm hearth on a cold night, but it faded as quickly as it had formed, replaced by the vision of herself in a doctor's white coat. Saving lives. "Oh, Tommy," Nan sighed, her voice tinged with regret. "You're very kind, but I'm afraid I must decline my studies." Tommy's smile faltered, but he pressed on, his eyes pleading. "Surely you can spare one evening? You work so hard, Nan. Don't you think you deserve a break?" Nan shook her head, her resolve strengthening like steel being tempered. "It's not about deserving a break, Tommy. It's about dedication. I can't divide my attention right now. My goal requires all of me." Tommy's shoulders slumped slightly, but there was respect in his eyes. "I understand," he said softly. "But Nan, have you considered that you could have both? A career and a family?" For a moment, Nan allowed herself to consider his words. The idea was tempting, like a siren's call promising a life of balance and fulfillment. But she knew deep in her bones that she couldn't compromise. "Perhaps someday, Tommy," she said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. But not now. Right now I need to focus entirely on becoming a doctor. It's not just a career for me, it's a calling. Tommy nodded, disappointment clear on his face, but mixed with admiration. "You're an extraordinary woman, Nan Harding," he said as he turned to leave. "I hope the world is ready for you." As the door closed behind Tommy, Nan leaned against it, her heart heavy but her resolve stronger than ever. The room seemed to close in around her, the weight of her decision pressing down like a physical force. She turned back to her desk, where her medical texts awaited, like old friends offering comfort and purpose. The challenges Nan faced were numerous and daunting, looming over her like storm clouds on the horizon. Access to medical education for women was limited, and the skepticism of male colleagues was a constant hurdle. But with each obstacle, Nan's determination only grew. She was like a sapling pushing through concrete, bending but never breaking. Long hours at the women's hospital became her sanctuary. Here, among the hushed whispers of patients and the antiseptic smell of the wards, Nan found her true calling. Every life she touched, every small victory against illness and injury, fueled her passion and confirmed her choice. The rhythmic beeping of machines and the soft padding of nurses' shoes became the soundtrack to her growing expertise. As the days turned into weeks and months, Nan's journey became a beacon of inspiration for the younger girls at Plumfield. They watched her with wide eyes, seeing in her the embodiment of their own dreams and aspirations. Nan stood as a living testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of following one's heart, no matter the obstacles. In the quiet moments, when doubt crept in like a thief in the night, Nan would close her eyes and picture the future she was fighting for. In her mind's eye, she saw herself standing tall in a doctor's coat, surrounded by grateful patients and respectful colleagues. This vision, more than anything else, gave her the strength to turn back to her books, to face another day of challenges, and to keep pushing forward toward her dream. As Nan immersed herself in her studies, a letter arrived from Plumfield. It bore news of Dan Keene, another of Joe's former students. The contents of the letter made Nan's blood run cold. Dan, always the most unpredictable of Joe's boys, had found himself entangled in a web of legal trouble. As she read the details, Nan couldn't help but wonder. Would Dan's predicament test not only his character, but the very bonds of their Plumfield family? And how would this unexpected turn of events impact her own journey? Dan Keene had always been the most unpredictable of Joe's boys. Now he found himself entangled in a web of legal trouble that would test his character and the bonds of his Plumfield family. The night air hung heavy with the promise of trouble as Dan walked alongside his friend through the rougher part of town. Shadows danced on grimy walls, stretching and twisting like living things. The distant sound of sirens and the occasional shout echoed through the narrow streets, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked around every corner. Dan's muscles tensed involuntarily, his body remembering old habits he thought he'd left behind. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, a primal warning system that had saved him more than once in his tumultuous past. Suddenly, the shadows came alive. A group of men materialized from the darkness, their eyes glinting with malice and their bodies coiled with violent intent. Without warning, they descended upon Dan's friend like a pack of hungry wolves. In that moment, something snapped inside Dan. The world around him blurred, sounds muffled as if he were underwater. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out everything but the urgent need to protect his friend. Dan's fist flew with a fluid grace that belied the violence of his actions. Each punch landed with a sickening thud, the impact reverberating up his arms. The taste of copper filled his mouth, whether from his own blood or someone else's, he couldn't tell. The brawl seemed to last both an eternity and mere seconds. When the police sirens finally pierced through the fog of adrenaline, Dan found himself standing amidst a sea of groaning bodies. His knuckles were raw and bleeding, his breath coming in ragged gasps that burned his lungs. The cold metal of handcuffs against his wrists brought reality crashing back. As the police car door slammed shut, Dan's mind raced with the implications of what he'd done. The progress he'd made, the trust he'd built at Plumfield. Had he thrown it all away in one moment of blind fury? News of Dan's arrest spread through Plumfield like wildfire, leaving a trail of shock and disbelief in its wake. Joe and Professor Bear sat in stunned silence, the weight of Dan's troubled past pressing down on them like a physical force. They exchanged a look of deep concern, their minds racing with memories of the progress Dan had made, and the fear that it might all have been undone in a single night. The journey to the jail was a somber one. The car seemed to crawl through the streets, each mile stretching out impossibly long. When they finally saw Dan, his face a mask of guilt and anger, their hearts broke for the boy they had come to love as their own. Dan's eyes, usually so full of life and mischief, now held a storm of conflicting emotions. He was torn between fierce loyalty to his friend and the crushing disappointment he knew he had caused his Plumfield family. The cold, stark walls of the jail cell seemed to close in around him, a physical manifestation of the trap he had unwittingly set for himself. As the days passed and the case progressed, Plumfield rallied around Dan. Character witnesses came forward, their testimonies painting a picture of a reformed young man with a good heart. Each word spoken in his defense was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, giving Dan hope when he felt most lost. The courtroom buzzed with tension on the day of the judgment. Dan stood before the judge, his posture straight but his eyes downcast. The judge's voice, stern yet not unkind, filled the room as he delivered his verdict. Taking into account Dan's past and the circumstances of the fight, he issued a stern warning but released Dan on probation. Relief washed over Dan like a cool wave, but it was tinged with a deep-seated realization. This experience had shaken him to his very core, forcing him to confront the impulsive nature that had been both his strength and his weakness. As he walked out of the courtroom, surrounded by the loving embrace of his Plumfield family, Dan made a silent vow. He would find a way to channel his strength and loyalty into more positive outlets. Like a blacksmith tempering steel, Dan knew he must learn to control the fire of his temper, to shape it into something useful and good. The road ahead would not be easy, but as he looked at the faces of those who had stood by him, Dan felt a glimmer of hope. As Dan stepped out into the sunlight, feeling the warmth on his face for the first time in days, a commotion near the courthouse steps caught his attention. A group had gathered around a young man in a crisp naval uniform, his face beaming with excitement and nerves. Dan recognized him immediately, Emil Hoffman, Joe's sailor nephew. What could have brought him here on this day? As Dan moved closer, he overheard snippets of conversation that made his heart race with a mix of envy and longing. A new adventure was on the horizon, but for whom? Emil Hoffman stood on the precipice of a new adventure. Joe's sailor nephew, now a newly promoted officer, was about to embark on his first major voyage. The salty breeze ruffled his hair as he gazed out at the harbor, his heart thrumming with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Plumfield bustled with activity in the days leading up to his departure. The familiar sense of home, fresh-baked bread and sun-warmed grass, mingled with the sharp tang of polish and new canvas. In his room, Emil's sea chest lay open, a wooden maw ready to swallow his life for the coming months. With hands calloused from years of rope work, Emil carefully packed each item. The gleaming brass of his navigational instruments caught the light, nestling beside dog-eared books that smelled of adventure and distant shores. A few cherished mementos, a pressed flower from Daisy, a smooth stone from Demi, found their way into the chest, each one a tether to the life he was leaving behind. In the warm glow of the afternoon sun, Joe sat with Emil, her needle flashing as she mended his uniforms. The familiar rhythm of their conversation was punctuated by the soft snip of scissors and the rustle of fabric. "Remember, Emil," Joe said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The sea is as unforgiving as it is beautiful. Always keep your wits about you." Emil nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of determination and apprehension. "I will, Aunt Joe. I've been preparing for this my whole life." His voice caught slightly on the words, betraying the weight of the moment. The night before his departure, Plumfield buzzed with anticipation. The farewell dinner was a bittersweet affair, laughter mingling with the occasional sniffle. Stories flowed like wine, painting vivid pictures of Emil's childhood escapades and his journey to becoming a sailor. The clinking of cutlery and the warm glow of candles created a cocoon of familiarity that Emil tried to memorize, knowing it would have to sustain him through lonely nights at sea. As the evening wore on, Professor Pear rose from his seat, his kind eyes twinkling. In his hands, he held a small polished box. "Emil," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to have this." The room fell silent as Emil opened the box to reveal a compass, its face weathered but still true. "It belonged to my father," the professor explained, his accent more pronounced with emotion. "May it guide you safely home." Tears pricked Emil's eyes as he carefully closed the box, the weight of the gift settling in his heart like an anchor. The cool metal seemed to pulse with the hopes and fears of generations of sailors who had come before him. Dawn broke crisp and clear on the day of departure, the sky a palette of pinks and golds that promised fair weather. The Plumfield family made their way to the harbor, the salty air carrying whispers of faraway lands. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries a melancholy soundtrack to the morning. The ship loomed before them, a magnificent three-masted vessel that seemed to strain against its moorings, eager to set sail. Its wooden flanks gleamed in the early light, promising both adventure and peril. Goodbyes were exchanged in a flurry of hugs and handshakes. Jo held Emil tight, her small frame belying her strength. "Come back to us," she whispered fiercely, her words almost lost in the bustle of the docks. Emil's cousins, Daisy and Demi, clung to him like limpets. "Bring us back something exotic," Demi demanded, his voice muffled against Emil's jacket. "And write to us," Daisy added, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Emil ruffled their hair, his heart swelling with affection. "I promise," he said, his voice husky with emotion. The weight of their expectations settled on his shoulders, a burden he was determined to bear with grace. As Emil climbed aboard, the reality of the long separation ahead crashed over the gathered family like a wave. The ship's whistle cut through the air, a clarion call to adventure that sent a shiver down Emil's spine. From the deck, Emil waved farewell, his figure growing smaller as the vessel pulled away from the dock. The creaking of ropes and the shouts of sailors filled the air as the ship began its journey. Jo and the others remained rooted to the spot, their eyes fixed on the horizon long after the ship had disappeared from view, as if their collective gaze could keep Emil safe. The journey back to Plumfield was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the hill overlooking their home, Jo paused, her gaze drawn to the distant sea. She reflected on how Emil's departure marked a new chapter in his life, and how the vast, unpredictable ocean would shape the man he would become. As the family settled back into the rhythms of Plumfield, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. They all knew that somewhere out there, Emil was facing his own challenges and adventures. Little did they know that at that very moment, another member of their extended family was about to embark on a journey of his own. Miles away, in a bustling port city, Nat stood on the deck of a steamship. His heart pounded in his chest as he clutched his violin case, a lifeline connecting his past to his uncertain future. The first notes of a new melody began to form in his mind, a song of hope and trepidation that mirrored the journey ahead. Nat's heart raced as he stood on the deck of the steamship. His violin case was clutched tightly to his chest like a lifeline, a tangible connection to his past and his dreams. The salty breeze whipped through his hair, carrying with it the tang of adventure and the bittersweet scent of farewell. As the coastline of home slowly melted into the horizon, a whirlpool of emotions churned in Nat's stomach. Excitement, fear, and a touch of longing for the familiar. The journey across the Atlantic was a blur of endless blue and restless nights. Nat spent hours on deck, his fingers absently tracing the worn leather of his violin case as he watched the ocean stretch to infinity. The rhythmic crashing of waves against the hull became a constant companion, a backdrop to his swirling thoughts of what lay ahead. When the ship finally docked in London, Nat felt as though he'd stepped into a living, breathing storybook. The city assaulted his senses with its vibrant energy. Towering buildings of weathered stone reached toward the sky, their spires piercing through the ever-present fog. Horse-drawn carriages clattered along cobblestone streets, their wheels creating a staccato rhythm that seemed to pulse through the very air. The cacophony of accents and languages swirled around him like a dizzying symphony. Nat's first taste of London's rich musical culture came in the form of a symphony at the Royal Albert Hall. As he settled into his seat, the grand architecture of the hall left him breathless. Ornate carvings adorned every surface, and the domed ceiling seemed to stretch endlessly upward. Then, as the first notes of the orchestra filled the air, Nat felt as though his soul had taken flight. The music washed over him in waves, each crescendo and diminuendo, painting vivid pictures in his mind. Violins soared like birds on the wind, while cellos rumbled like distant thunder. When the final chord faded away, leaving behind a charged silence, Nat knew with bone-deep certainty that this was the world he was meant to inhabit. With renewed determination burning in his chest, Nat set his sights on Germany, the beating heart of classical music education. The train journey to Leipzig was a tapestry of rolling countryside and quaint villages, each mile bringing him closer to his dreams. Upon arrival, the city's charm immediately captivated him. Cobblestone streets wound between centuries-old buildings, their facades telling silent stories of the great composers who had once walked these very paths. The air seemed to hum with the ghosts of melodies past, urging Nat forward. Enrolling in the prestigious Leipzig Conservatory felt like stepping onto a battlefield. Nat found himself surrounded by talented musicians from across Europe, each as hungry for success as he was. The competition was fierce, a constant undercurrent of tension that set his nerves on edge. For the first time since leaving Plumfield, doubt began to creep into Nat's mind, whispering insidiously that perhaps he wasn't good enough after all. Homesickness hit him like a physical ache, a hollow feeling in the pit of his stomach that no amount of German cuisine could fill. In the quiet moments between classes and practice sessions, Nat's thoughts would drift back to the familiar comfort of Plumfield, the scent of Joe's freshly baked bread, the sound of laughter echoing through the halls, the feeling of belonging. All of it seemed a lifetime away. He poured his heart out in long letters to his friends, his words a lifeline to the world he'd left behind. As weeks melted into months, Nat slowly found his footing. He threw himself into his studies with a fervor that surprised even himself. The German language, once an impenetrable wall of harsh consonants and unfamiliar rhythms, began to make sense. He explored the city's musical landmarks, tracing the footsteps of Bach and Mendelssohn with reverent awe. Each practice room became a sanctuary, a place where Nat could lose himself in the music and forget the weight of his ambitions. Gradually, Nat's talent began to shine through. His violin sang with a passion that caught the attention of his instructors. Praise, once so rare and precious, became more frequent. Small recitals followed, each performance building his confidence like a slowly rising tide. The nerves never fully disappeared, but Nat learned to channel them into his music, using the adrenaline to fuel his performances. Yet, there were still moments of struggle. During one particularly challenging period, when the weight of his ambitions seemed almost too heavy to bear, a package arrived from Plumfield. Inside, Nat found a treasure trove of encouragement. Letters from his friends, small trinkets that smelled of home, and a pressed flower from the garden he loved so dearly. It was as if a warm ray of sunshine had broken through the clouds of his doubt, reminding him of the love and support that stretched across the ocean. With renewed vigor, Nat threw himself back into his music. His violin became an extension of his very being, each note a testament to his growth and dedication. As his first year abroad drew to a close, Nat found himself perched on the edge of a revelation. Sitting by the window of his small room, watching the sun set over Leipzig's spires, Nat reflected on his journey. He realized that his time in Europe had changed him in ways he never could have imagined. His understanding of music had deepened, yes, but so too had his understanding of himself and the world around him. With his violin nestled under his chin, Nat began to play, pouring all he had learned and all he hoped to become into the melody. As the last note faded away, he knew that this was just the beginning of his adventure. As Nat lowered his violin, a sudden knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find a telegram waiting, its contents unknown but promising news from home. Just as he was about to tear it open, a commotion in the hallway caught his attention. Students were rushing past, whispering excitedly about a surprise visit from a world-renowned violinist. Nat hesitated, torn between reading news from home and seizing this unexpected opportunity. With his heart pounding, he made his choice, unaware that his decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change the course of his musical journey forever. Demi Brooke, Joe's studious and idealistic nephew, stood at the threshold of his journalistic career. His eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as he clutched his newly acquired press pass, ready to embark on his first day at the local newspaper in the nearby city. The bustling newsroom hit Demi like a wave of sensory overload. The air buzzed with the clatter of typewriters and the sharp aroma of fresh ink mingled with stale coffee. Reporters darted about like frenzied ants, their voices a constant hum of urgency. Demi's heart raced, his palms sweaty as he gripped his satchel tighter. This was it, the beginning of his dream to change the world through the power of words. But dreams, as Demi quickly learned, often start small. His first assignments were far from the hard-hitting exposés he'd imagined. Instead, he found himself penning pieces about local bake sales and crafting obituaries for beloved community members. Yet Demi approached each task with the same intensity he'd give a Pulitzer-worthy story. Every word mattered, every fact checked and double-checked. Days melted into weeks, and Demi fell into a rhythm. Each morning, he'd board the train from Plumfield, his bag heavy with notepads and a thermos of Aunt Joe's coffee. Strong enough to wake the dead, she'd joke. The gentle sway of the train car became his sanctuary, a place to brainstorm ideas and craft leads that would grab readers by the collar. Then came the day that would change everything. Demi was returning from the water cooler, his ears perking up like a bloodhound catching a scent. Two seasoned reporters, thinking they were alone, were discussing rumors of corruption within the city council. Demi's heart pounded. This was his chance. For weeks, Demi worked like a man possessed. He burned the midnight oil, his desk lamp a lone beacon in the darkened office. He met sources in dimly lit diners, their hushed voices barely audible over the clink of coffee cups. He pored over public records until the words blurred before his eyes. Each new piece of information was a puzzle piece, slowly revealing a picture of greed and deceit. When Demi finally presented his findings to his editor, a gruff man with ink-stained fingers and a perpetual scowl, he held his breath. The editor's eyes widened as he read, his frown slowly morphing into a look of impressed surprise. "Run with it, kid," he growled, and Demi felt as if he'd been given wings. The article hit the front page like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves through the community. Demi's byline became a talking point at dinner tables across the city. He'd tasted the sweet nectar of journalistic success, and it was intoxicating. But with recognition came new challenges. Demi soon found himself navigating the murky waters of journalistic ethics. His editor, eyeing the uptick in sales, began pushing for more sensational stories. "Jazz it up, Brooke," he'd say, tossing Demi's drafts back at him. "Readers want sizzle, not just steak." Demi's idealism clashed with these demands like waves against a rocky shore. He'd lie awake at night, torn between his principles and the realities of the newspaper business. It was during one of these sleepless nights that he penned a letter to Aunt Joe, pouring out his conflicted heart. Joe's reply arrived like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "Stay true to yourself, Demi," she wrote. "Your integrity is your most valuable asset. Use your voice wisely, for it has the power to shape minds and hearts." Her words were a balm to his troubled soul, reminding him of why he'd chosen this path in the first place. Armed with Joe's wisdom, Demi faced his greatest test yet. A tip led him to uncover a scandal involving one of the newspaper's most prominent advertisers. The story was dynamite, but publishing it could cost the paper dearly. Pressure mounted like a gathering storm. Whispers of "let it go" and "it's not worth it" echoed through the newsroom. But Demi stood firm, his resolve as unyielding as an old oak tree. He worked tirelessly, gathering ironclad evidence and crafting a story that was impossible to ignore. When he finally submitted the article, it felt like he was lighting a fuse that could either illuminate the truth or blow up in his face. To Demi's relief and pride, the story not only ran but sparked a firestorm of reforms. His byline became synonymous with fearless reporting and unwavering integrity. As his articles graced the front page with increasing frequency, Demi felt the weight of his responsibility grow. Sitting at his desk one evening, the newsroom quiet save for the gentle hum of a distant printing press, Demi reflected on his journey. He realized that the power of the press was like a double-edged sword, capable of great good or terrible harm. With a deep breath and a determined set to his jaw, he recommitted himself to wielding that power responsibly, determined to use his voice to make a positive impact on the world around him. As Demi packed up his things, ready to head home after another long day, the phone on his desk rang shrilly. He answered, his brow furrowing as he listened to the voice on the other end. His face paled, and he gripped the receiver tighter. Dan Keene, arrested for robbery? There must be some mistake, he muttered, his mind already racing. Little did Demi know, this call would plunge him into a story that would test not only his journalistic skills, but also his faith in justice and the bonds of friendship. Dan Keene's life took an unexpected and dramatic turn. He found himself falsely accused of robbery, a charge that would test his character and the faith of those who believed in him. The relentless sun beat down on the dusty mining camp, its heat as oppressive as the weight of suspicion that had settled over Dan. Sweat trickled down his back as he swung his pickaxe, each impact echoing the pounding of his heart. The air was thick with the acrid smell of dirt and desperation, punctuated by the rhythmic clanging of metal on stone and the rumble of laden carts. Whispers, sharp as the rocks they mined, began to circulate when a substantial sum vanished from the company safe. Eyes turned to Dan, his troubled past casting long shadows over his present. The once friendly faces of his fellow workers now twisted with distrust, their gazes cutting deeper than any pickaxe. Before he could fully grasp the gravity of the situation, the cold bite of handcuffs shocked Dan's wrists. The metal clinked ominously, a stark contrast to the warmth of acceptance he had begun to feel at Plumfield. His world narrowed to the confines of a jail cell, the bars a tangible representation of the barriers he'd thought he'd left behind. News of Dan's arrest spread like wildfire, scorching the tranquil grounds of Plumfield. Jo's heart plummeted, her face a canvas of disbelief and determination. "No," she declared, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Dan couldn't have done this. We must stand by him." With Professor Bare's unwavering support, Jo rallied the Plumfield community. Their faith in Dan's reformation glowed like a beacon in the gathering storm of doubt and accusation. The journey to the mining town stretched endlessly, each mile a test of Jo's resolve. Her mind raced with possibilities, thoughts crashing like waves against the shore of her consciousness. The jailhouse loomed before them, a grim fortress of stone and steel. The sight of Dan behind bars nearly shattered Jo's composure. "Dan," she whispered, reaching through the bars to clasp his hand. The roughness of his skin spoke of hard work and harder times. "We're here. We believe in you." Dan's eyes, once bright with hope, now reflected a tempest of emotions. Anger flashing like lightning, fear rumbling like thunder, and a deep-seated hurt that seemed to have taken root in his very soul. "Why bother, Mrs. Jo?" he asked, his voice hoarse, as if the words themselves pained him. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'll never be anything more than what they say I am." Jo's grip tightened, her touch a lifeline in Dan's sea of despair. "Don't you dare give up, Dan Keene. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." True to her word, Jo and Professor Bare engaged a local lawyer, a man with a reputation as tenacious as a bulldog and an eye for detail as sharp as an eagle's. Together they embarked on a relentless quest for the truth, leaving no stone unturned in their investigation. Days bled into weeks, and Dan's cell became a crucible for his spirit. Each passing moment tested his resolve, the walls closing in like the unforgiving rock of the mines. Yet even in his darkest hours, the memory of Plumfield and the unwavering support of Jo and the others kept a small flame of hope flickering in the darkness of his despair. The breakthrough came like the first ray of sunlight after a long, dark night. A disgruntled former employee, bitter as wormwood and vengeful as a scorned lover, had framed Dan in a twisted act of retribution against the company. The evidence, when presented in court, was as clear as day and twice as damning. The courtroom buzzed with tension, a hive of anticipation as the judge delivered his verdict. Not guilty, he declared, the words ringing out like a bell of freedom. Dan stood, stunned, as the reality of his exoneration washed over him like a cleansing rain. But freedom, Dan soon discovered, came with its own set of chains. Suspicious glances and whispered comments followed him like persistent shadows, a constant reminder that some stains are not easily washed away. In the quiet of Plumfield's orchard, where the scent of ripening apples hung sweet in the air, Dan poured out his heart to Jo. "I'm grateful, Mrs. Jo, more than I can say, but I can't stay here. I need to find a place where I can start fresh, where the weight of the past doesn't press down so hard." Jo listened, her heart heavy but understanding. "Where will you go?" she asked softly, her voice barely louder than the gentle rustle of leaves above them. Dan's eyes looked to the horizon, as if seeing a path only he could discern. "There's a Native American tribe out west. I've heard they judge a man by his actions, not his history. I think that's where I need to be." The day of Dan's departure arrived all too soon, the morning mist clinging to the ground like nature's own reluctance to let him go. As he stood ready to embark on his new journey, the Plumfield family gathered to bid him farewell. Dan turned to Jo, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'll come back someday, Mrs. Jo," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "When I've found my way, when I know who I really am. Thank you for everything." With one last embrace, Dan shouldered his pack and set off down the road, his figure gradually fading into the distance, like a dream upon waking. Jo watched him go, her heart full of hope and pride for the young man who had faced adversity with courage and emerged determined to forge his own path. As Dan's silhouette disappeared over the horizon, Jo's attention was suddenly drawn to a commotion near the house. Nan came running, her face flushed with excitement and worry. "Mrs. Jo!" she called out, breathless. "A telegram just arrived. It's about Emil, his ship. There's been an attack." Jo's heart leaped into her throat. As she rushed to read the message, she couldn't help but wonder, had one trial ended only for another to begin? Emil Hoffman's seafaring adventure takes an unexpected turn. His ship falls prey to a pirate attack in the treacherous waters of the South China Sea. The pre-dawn air hangs heavy with salt and anticipation. Emil, fresh from his night watch, leans against the ship's railing, his eyes scanning the misty horizon. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull lulls him into a false sense of security. Suddenly, the ship lurches violently, nearly throwing him overboard. His heart leaps into his throat as realization dawns. They're under attack. "Pirates!" The cry rips through the air, shattering the early morning calm. Emil's mind races, memories of Plumfield's lessons on courage and quick thinking flooding back. He takes a deep breath, steeling himself for what's to come. "To your stations, men!" Emil's voice booms across the deck, surprising even himself with its authority. The crew, shaken from their stupor, scramble to their posts. The sound of bare feet slapping against the wooden deck mingles with the clang of metal and the shouts of men preparing for battle. The pirates emerge from the mist like wraiths, their hooks scraping against the hull with a bone-chilling screech. Emil's skin prickles with goosebumps, but he pushes down the rising tide of fear. He needs to think, to act. A flash of inspiration strikes him. "The fire hoses!" he shouts, grabbing the nearest crewman. "We'll use them to keep the pirates at bay." They race to the cargo hold, the metal stairs clanging beneath their feet. The coiled hoses, dormant snakes waiting to strike, come alive in their hands. With a nod to his companions, Emil gives the signal. Water erupts from the nozzles, arcing through the air in glistening streams before crashing onto the would-be invaders. The battle rages on, time blurring into a chaotic dance of action and reaction. Emil's throat burns raw from shouting encouragement, his clothes clinging to his sweat-soaked skin. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixes with the salty air, creating a nauseating cocktail. In a heart-stopping moment, a pirate slips aboard, his cutlass glinting menacingly in the morning sun. Emil spots him advancing on an injured crewmate, time seeming to slow. Without hesitation, he throws himself into the fray. The clash of steel rings out as he parries the pirate's blow, muscle memory from countless training sessions kicking in. With a swift move, he disarms the attacker, sending him tumbling back over the railing with a splash. Just when it seems the ordeal will never end, salvation appears on the horizon. A naval patrol, their flags snapping in the wind, charges towards them like avenging angels. The pirates, realizing their defeat, melt back into the mist they emerge from, leaving behind only the echoes of their attack. In the aftermath, Emil stands on the deck, his clothes soaked with seawater and sweat. The captain approaches, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've got the makings of a fine sailor, Hoffman," he says, pride evident in his voice. Emil's crewmates gather around, their faces a mix of exhaustion and admiration. As the ship limps towards the nearest port, its wounds visible but its spirit unbroken, Emil retreats to his quarters. He pulls out a weathered piece of paper and begins to write, his pen flying across the page as he recounts the harrowing experience to his family at Plumfield. Emil pauses, reflecting on the day's events. He realizes that the values instilled in him at Plumfield, courage, quick thinking, and loyalty, were the very things that saw him through this ultimate test. A small smile plays on his lips as he continues writing, knowing that this experience marks a turning point in his career. As he finishes his letter, a commotion on deck draws his attention. Emil rushes out, his heart racing once again. What new challenge awaits? As he emerges into the sunlight, his eyes widen at the sight before him, thoughts of his own adventure fading as he wonders about the lives and dreams of those back home. Little does he know that at that very moment, Josie Bear, Joe's adopted daughter, is embarking on her own journey, one that will test her resolve and passion in ways she never imagined. Josie Bear, Joe's adopted daughter, had a dream that burned brighter than the stars. Her heart was set on becoming an actress, a passion that consumed her every waking moment. With a mix of excitement and trepidation bubbling in her chest, she bid farewell to the familiar comforts of Plumfield, ready to chase her ambitions in the dazzling world of theater. The moment Josie stepped off the train in New York City, her senses were overwhelmed. The cacophony of car horns, street vendors, and hurried footsteps created a symphony of urban life. Towering skyscrapers reached for the clouds, their windows reflecting the bustling streets below. The air was thick with the scent of street food and car exhaust, a far cry from the fresh, grassy smell of Plumfield. Clutching her small suitcase, Josie felt like a tiny boat adrift in a vast ocean of possibilities. Inside, carefully folded outfits nestled against a few cherished mementos, including a letter from Joe. As her fingers brushed against the envelope, she felt a surge of courage. The paper crinkled softly, a whisper of home amidst the city's roar. The first weeks flew by in a whirlwind of emotions. Josie's heart raced with each audition, her footsteps echoing through countless hallways as she waited for her chance to shine. The sting of rejection was sharp and frequent, each no feeling like a slap across her dreams. But Josie was nothing if not resilient. She'd allow herself a moment of disappointment, then square her shoulders and march on, her determination as unyielding as the city's concrete streets. To keep herself afloat, Josie took a job as a seamstress in a small theater. The constant prick of the needle on her fingers became a physical reminder of her journey. In quiet moments between mending costumes, she'd close her eyes and let her imagination soar. The musty smell of the backstage area would transform into the sweet scent of success, the dim work light morphing into a warm spotlight caressing her face. Every spare moment became an opportunity for growth. Josie would slip into the back of theaters, her eyes wide and hungry for knowledge. She watched performances with the intensity of a hawk, her gaze darting between the actors' expressions and movements. Her notebook quickly filled with hurried scribbles, each page a treasure trove of observations and insights. Dance classes left her muscles screaming in protest, but her spirit soared with each graceful movement mastered. Elocution lessons molded her voice into a powerful instrument, capable of conveying the subtlest emotions. With each passing day, Josie felt herself transforming, shedding the skin of an amateur and slowly emerging as a true performer. Fate, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. On a day when the city sky mirrored the gray of Josie's mood, she quite literally bumped into Madame Beaumont. The elderly actress's eyes still sparkled with the passion of her youth, recognizing a kindred spirit in the young woman before her. Their chance encounter blossomed into a mentorship that became Josie's anchor in the tumultuous sea of show business. Madame Beaumont's small, cluttered apartment became a sanctuary for Josie. The air was always thick with the scent of strong tea and face powder. The walls adorned with faded playbills and photographs of glory days long past. Here, amidst the memorabilia of a life lived on stage, Josie absorbed the old actress's wisdom like a sponge. Madame's stories of triumphs and failures, coupled with her keen insights into the craft, were more valuable than any formal training. As months flew by, Josie's initial wide-eyed optimism was tempered by the harsh realities of the theater world. Yet her dedication never wavered. She was like a tree in a storm, bending but never breaking, her roots growing deeper with each challenge faced. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, when the city was painted in hues of gold and red, opportunity knocked. An audition for a supporting role in a new play? Josie's heart thundered in her chest as she prepared, drawing on every lesson and experience she'd gathered. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pinned up her hair, her reflection in the mirror a mix of nerves and fierce determination. The audition room was a battlefield, and Josie entered it armed with talent honed by relentless practice. Her voice rang clear and true, her movements precise yet natural. As she finished her piece, a hush fell over the room, broken only by the scribbling of the director's pen. The silence was deafening, stretching out like an eternity compressed into mere seconds. Days later, the news arrived like a bolt of lightning, electrifying every nerve in Josie's body. She had landed the part. The world seemed to spin around her as she clutched the letter, tears of joy blurring the words on the page. Rehearsals consumed Josie's world, each day a new adventure in bringing her character to life. She threw herself into the role with a fervor that impressed even the most seasoned cast members. Late nights poring over her lines, early mornings practicing her blocking, every moment was devoted to perfecting her performance. The smell of grease paint and the creak of the stage boards became as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Opening night arrived in a flurry of nervous energy and excitement. As Josie peered through the curtain, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the sea of unfamiliar faces, she spotted a cluster of familiar ones. Joe and several friends from Plumfield had made the journey to support her. Their presence was like a warm embrace, giving her the final boost of courage she needed. The stage lights blazed to life, momentarily blinding Josie as she stepped into her character's shoes. Time seemed to stand still as she delivered her lines, each word infused with the passion and dedication of her journey. The world beyond the stage faded away, leaving only the story unfolding in the here and now. When the final curtain fell, the applause washed over Josie like a cleansing rain, washing away the doubts and fears of the past months. The thunderous ovation seemed to shake the very foundations of the theater, and Josie's heart soared with the realization that she had done it. She had brought her character to life and touched the audience's hearts. In the days that followed, Josie's name appeared in local papers, her performance praised for its authenticity and charm. It was a small step, but to Josie it felt like scaling a mountain. As the play's run continued, she penned long letters to Plumfield, pouring out her experiences and gratitude onto the pages. With each performance, Josie's confidence grew, and she looked to the future with bright eyes and an open heart, knowing that her journey in the theater world had only just begun. As the final curtain fell on the last night of the play's run, Josie felt a bitter-sweet mix of accomplishment and anticipation. She had proven to herself and the world that she belonged on the stage, but what challenges awaited her next? As she removed her stage makeup, revealing the face of a young woman forever changed by her experiences, a knock on her dressing room door startled her. "Miss Pear?" a stagehand called out. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." Josie's heart skipped a beat as she rose to answer, wondering who could be seeking her out at this hour, and what new twist her theatrical journey might be about to take. The bustling platform was a blur of motion and noise, but Nat's eyes searched for one face in particular. The years he'd spent studying music in Europe had changed him, filling him with a newfound confidence that thrummed beneath his skin like a constant melody. Suddenly, a flash of golden hair caught his attention. shimmering like sunlight on water. There she was, Daisy Brooke, her eyes wide with joy as they locked onto his. Time seemed to slow, the world around them fading away as years of unspoken feelings passed between them in a single electric moment. "Nat!" Daisy's voice rang out, clear as a bell over the din of the crowd. She rushed towards him, her skirt swishing around her ankles, and without hesitation, Nat swept her into his arms. The scent of lavender in her hair washed over him, bringing with it a flood of childhood memories that made his heart ache with nostalgia. "I've missed you," Nat whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He could feel Daisy's warmth against him, solid and real, banishing the loneliness of the past years in an instant. As they pulled apart, Nat drank in the sight of her. Daisy had blossomed into a beautiful young woman, her features more refined, but still holding that spark of kindness he'd always admired. Her blue eyes sparkled with a depth of feeling that made his breath catch in his throat. Daisy, in turn, marveled at the man before her. Gone was the shy, uncertain boy she'd known. In his place stood a confident musician, his posture straight and his gaze steady. The change both thrilled and intimidated her, sparking a flutter of butterflies in her stomach. The days that followed were a whirlwind of joy and rediscovery. Nat and Daisy spent countless hours together, their footsteps tracing familiar paths through the grounds of Plumfield. The gardens were alive with the vibrant colors of spring, mirroring the renewed energy between them. Nat's tales of Europe captivated Daisy, his words painting vivid pictures of grand concert halls with gilded ceilings and cobblestone streets echoing with the sounds of 100 different languages. She listened, enraptured, imagining herself walking those streets beside him. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Nat took out his violin. The instrument gleamed in the fading light, a testament to the care and love he'd poured into his craft. As he began to play, the notes danced on the air, weaving a tapestry of sound that spoke of longing, adventure, and homecoming. Daisy sat transfixed, her eyes never leaving Nat's face as his fingers flew over the strings. The music seemed to reach into her very soul, awakening feelings she'd long kept hidden. She watched the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the slight smile that played at the corners of his mouth as he lost himself in the melody. In that moment, she knew with certainty that her heart belonged to him. As spring blossomed around them, so did their relationship. They found themselves seeking each other's company at every opportunity, their conversations flowing easily from childhood reminiscences to dreams of the future. Nat felt a growing certainty that his feelings for Daisy had deepened into something profound and unshakable. One balmy evening, they strolled through the garden, the air heavy with the heady scent of roses. Fireflies danced around them, their gentle light mirroring the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Nat's heart raced as he gathered his courage, knowing this was the moment he'd been waiting for. "Daisy," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I've realized something during my time away. My love for music has only been surpassed by one thing: my love for you." He took her hands in his, marveling at how small and delicate they felt against his calloused musician's fingers. Daisy's eyes widened, a blush creeping across her cheeks like the first light of dawn. "Oh, Nat," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've loved you for so long. I was afraid you might never feel the same." Their first kiss was sweet and tender, a promise of the love they would share. As they walked hand in hand back to the house, the world seemed brighter, full of endless possibilities. The trees whispered secrets in the gentle evening breeze, and even the stars seemed to shine more brightly, as if celebrating their newfound happiness. News of their courtship spread quickly through Plumfield, met with joy and celebration. Jo, in particular, beamed with pride and happiness for the two young people she had watched grow up under her care. Her eyes misted over as she watched them together, remembering her own youthful romance. Nat's confidence, bolstered by his success in Europe, and Daisy's unwavering support, grew with each passing day. He saw a clear path forward, a life filled with music and love, with Daisy by his side through every triumph and challenge. One starlit night, as they sat on the porch swing, the gentle creaking of the chains, a soothing counterpoint to the chorus of crickets. Nat knew it was time to take the next step. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure Daisy must be able to hear it. Kneeling before her, he took her hand in his. The roughness of his fingers against her soft skin sent a shiver down her spine. "Daisy Brooke," he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion, "you've been my dearest friend, and now the love of my life. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy spilled down Daisy's cheeks, glistening in the moonlight. For a moment she was unable to speak, overwhelmed by the depth of her feelings. Finally she found her voice. "Yes, Nat," she said, her words choked with happiness. "1,000 times yes." Their engagement announcement was met with cheers and congratulations from the entire Plumfield family. As Nat and Daisy began to plan their future together, their love story stood as a testament to the enduring bonds formed at Plumfield and the power of love to overcome obstacles and distance. As the days passed in a haze of joy and planning, Nat and Daisy were so wrapped up in their own happiness that they barely noticed the buzz of excitement that began to ripple through Plumfield. It wasn't until they overheard a conversation between two of the younger students that they realized something was amiss. "Did you hear?" one boy whispered to another. "Dan Keene is coming back." Nat and Daisy exchanged a startled glance. Dan Keene, the wild, unpredictable boy who had left Plumfield years ago to live among Native Americans. His return was sure to bring changes to their peaceful world. As the sun set on another perfect day, Nat and Daisy stood hand in hand, watching the horizon. The future stretched before them, full of promise and love. But a shadow of uncertainty had crept in, leaving them to wonder, how would Dan's return affect the delicate balance of their newfound happiness? Dan Keene's return to Plumfield was a sight to behold. After several years living among Native Americans, he stood at the threshold, a man profoundly changed by his experiences. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the familiar grounds as Dan approached the old house. The scent of blooming lilacs hung in the air, a stark contrast to the earthy smells of his recent life. Each step on the worn path felt like a journey through time, memories flooding back with every crunch of gravel underfoot. The creaking porch steps announced his arrival, the sound achingly familiar, yet somehow foreign to his ears. As Dan emerged from the shadows, the gathered crowd fell silent. The boyish features they remembered had been sculpted by harsh elements and rich experiences. His skin, now tanned and weathered, told stories of long days under open skies. Eyes that once sparked with mischief now held a depth of wisdom that seemed to peer into the soul. Jo, her heart racing with a mixture of joy and disbelief, was the first to move. She rushed forward, enveloping Dan in a fierce embrace. The scent of ink and paper that clung to her brought a lump to Dan's throat, a reminder of the home he'd left behind. "Welcome home, my boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Dan's arms, now corded with lean muscle, returned the embrace gently. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured, like the steady flow of a river carving its path through stone. "It's good to be back," he said simply, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The room erupted into a flurry of questions and exclamations. Dan answered patiently, his words painting vivid pictures of life among the tribe. He spoke of misty mornings spent in silent communion with nature, of the rhythmic beat of drums around crackling fires, and of the profound sense of belonging he'd found. "I learned to listen," Dan explained, his gaze distant. "Not just to words, but to the whisper of wind through leaves, the stories told by animal tracks in the dust. Everything in nature has a voice if you're willing to hear it." The younger students hung on his every word, their eyes wide with wonder. To them, Dan was no longer just the rough and tumble boy they'd heard stories about, but a living legend, a bridge between their world and one they could scarcely imagine. As days passed, the true extent of Dan's transformation became clear. His presence seemed to calm those around him, like a still pond reflecting the sky. Conflicts that once would have ignited his temper now met with patience and understanding. One evening, as fireflies danced in the twilight beyond the windows, Dan revealed the next chapter in his journey to Jo and Professor Bear. His voice was soft but filled with purpose as he spoke of the substantial inheritance he'd received from a distant relative. I could buy myself a life of comfort, Dan mused, his fingers tracing patterns on the arm of his chair. But that's not the path I'm meant to walk. Jo leaned forward, her eyes shining with pride and curiosity. What do you have in mind, Dan? A smile, warm and determined, spread across Dan's face. I'm going to use every penny to make a difference. Schools for Native American children, medical clinics on reservations, better conditions for minors who risk their lives daily. It's time to give back, to help those who've been overlooked and mistreated for too long. The room fell silent, the weight of Dan's words settling over them like a blanket. Professor Pear nodded slowly, a look of deep respect etched on his features. You've found your calling, my boy, he said softly, and it's a noble one indeed. As news of Dan's plans spread through Plumfield, it ignited a spark of inspiration in the hearts of students and teachers alike. His commitment to social justice became a living lesson in compassion and responsibility. The day of Dan's departure arrived all too soon. As he stood on the porch, his few possessions packed and ready, a bittersweet atmosphere hung in the air. Jo approached him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You've come so far, Dan, she said, her voice wavering slightly. I always knew you had greatness in you, even in your wildest days. Dan's expression softened, and for a moment, the boy he once was shone through the man he'd become. I couldn't have done it without you, Jo, without all of you. Plumfield gave me roots when I was adrift. It'll always be home. He looked out over the familiar grounds, taking in the sight of the place that had shaped him. I'll be back, he promised, his voice firm with conviction. There's still so much to learn, so much to share. As Dan walked down the path, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun, those left behind felt a mixture of loss and pride. They knew that while Dan's journey was taking him away from Plumfield once again, his heart would always find its way back home. The weeks following Dan's departure passed in a blur of activity. Letters arrived sporadically, each one filled with tales of his work and the lives he was touching. But as summer began to wane, a curious energy began to build at Plumfield. Whispers of a grand gathering filled the halls, and an air of anticipation settled over the school like a warm blanket. Little did they know that Dan's return would be sooner than expected, and the reunion that awaited would change everything once again. Plumfield was abuzz with excitement. A hum of anticipation filled the air as former students and friends gathered for a grand reunion. The old house seemed to breathe with new life, its wooden floors creaking with joy under the weight of familiar footsteps. Laughter echoed through the halls, mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread and blooming flowers from the garden. Jo Byer stood at the entrance, a beacon of warmth and welcome. Her once dark hair now shimmered with strands of silver, like moonlight dancing on a river. Deep laugh lines framed her sparkling eyes, a testament to a life filled with love and mirth. As she opened her arms to greet each arrival, the years seemed to melt away, and for a moment they were all children again, seeking comfort in her embrace. One by one, her little men and women arrived, their childhood exuberance now tempered by the wisdom of adulthood. Emil, the sea captain, strode in with the confidence of a man who had tamed the wildest oceans. His weathered hands painted pictures in the air as he spun tales of far-off lands and heart-stopping adventures. The salty tang of the sea seemed to cling to him, a reminder of the world beyond Plumfield's sheltering walls. Nat and Daisy entered hand in hand, their fingers intertwined like the melodies they created together. The air around them seemed to hum with unheard music, a symphony of love and shared dreams. Their eyes shone with the excitement of newlyweds as they announced their plans to open a music school. Jo's heart swelled with pride, seeing the seeds of passion she had nurtured now, blossoming into a beautiful future. The door swung open again, bringing with it a gust of fresh air and purpose. Demi stepped in, his journalist's notebook tucked under his arm like a shield against injustice. His quiet determination filled the room as he shared his latest exposé on political corruption. Jo listened intently, marveling at how her once mischievous nephew had grown into a man dedicated to uncovering truths and fighting for what was right. A flurry of excitement announced Nan's arrival, her crisp white doctor's coat a stark contrast to the warm, earthy tones of Plumfield. She stood tall, her posture radiating the confidence of someone who had fought tooth and nail to achieve her dreams. But it was the gentle way Tommy's hand rested on the small of her back that caught everyone's attention. The room erupted in joyous cheers as they announced their engagement, Nan's usually stern face softening with a smile that could melt the coldest heart. As the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawn, Dan arrived. He moved with the quiet grace of a man who had seen both the beauty and harshness of the world. His eyes, once wild and untamed, now held a depth of understanding as he shared stories of the positive changes his work had brought to Native American communities and mining towns. Joe felt a surge of pride, remembering the troubled boy he had once been and marveling at the compassionate man he had become. The group meandered through Plumfield, their laughter bouncing off the walls as they revisited old haunts. Each corner held a memory. The attic where they had staged elaborate plays, its rafters still holding echoes of their childish giggles. The kitchen where they had stolen midnight snacks, the aroma of countless meals lingering in the air. The orchard where they had climbed trees and dreamed of their futures, the bark still bearing faint marks of their youthful adventures. In a moment of quiet reflection, Joe gathered everyone in the orchard. The smell of earth and green things filled the air as they dug a hole for a new sapling. As they planted the tree, its tender leaves reaching for the sky, Joe couldn't help but see it as a symbol of their own growth, rooted in the past but always reaching for new heights. The soil under their fingernails and the shared labor of planting brought them together, bridging the years that had passed since they were last all together. The day culminated in a feast that would have made Mrs. March proud. The dining room buzzed with conversation, forks clinking against plates as they shared their hopes and dreams for the future. The candlelight flickered across their faces, highlighting the bonds that had been forged in childhood and strengthened through the years. Joe looked around the table, her heart swelling with love for these remarkable individuals who had once been her charges and were now her equals. As the evening wound down, Joe found herself standing back, watching her little men and women with a heart so full it threatened to burst. They had grown in ways she could never have imagined, each carving their own path while staying true to the values they had learned at Plumfield. The room was filled with a warm glow, not just from the candles, but from the love and connection that radiated from each person. The reunion ended with hugs, tears, and promises to stay in touch and meet again. As the last guest departed, the echoes of their laughter still hanging in the air, Joe knew that the bonds forged at Plumfield would endure. She stood in the doorway, watching as the taillights of cars disappeared down the driveway, carrying her beloved students back to their own lives and adventures. In the quiet of the night, Joe walked through the empty halls of Plumfield, her footsteps echoing softly. She paused by the newly planted sapling in the orchard, its silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. With a smile, she whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for the privilege of being part of these extraordinary lives. As she turned back to the house, Joe knew that while this chapter might be closing, the story of Plumfield and the lives it had touched would continue to unfold in countless beautiful ways.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.